On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. The leadership of Al-Qaeda has great influence in Afghanistan and supports the Taliban regime in controlling most of that country. Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Revealing the truth about it could conceivably improve the world even more than the September 11th inside job degraded the world.
Welcome, Kevin Barrett, to this face-to-face. Today we're going to talk about some of the major subjects which are taking place around us in this part of the region. But we're going to begin with one of the major questions that you posed about 9/11 and the consequences of this question and the answers that you gave. What were the reactions to this truth-seeking mission that you had?
Well, I was the only Muslim in Madison, Wisconsin that I could find, that I knew of, who actually believed more or less the official story of 9/11 when it happened. At least I wasn't saying immediately that it was some kind of inside job. But all my Muslim friends assumed immediately that it probably was an inside job. And I said, well, let's wait and see what the evidence shows as it comes in. So during the next few years, I was finishing my Ph.D. at the University of Wisconsin, and I was too busy to spend a lot of time researching 9/11. I just assumed it would be another of these things that would never really be determined what really happened. And it was clearly affecting the world in a very profound way. It had completely changed the entire geopolitical landscape, the psychological landscape. It was destroying the Constitution, not only of the United States, but it was destroying the constitutional societies of Western Europe as well, and turning the whole world into kind of a globalized, militarized terror state. So I was not happy with this, but of course I was just finishing my PhD, and so I was just going along for the ride and kind of keeping my eyes open. And then at the end of 2003, I learned that Professor David Ray Griffin was writing his book, The New Pearl Harbor, arguing that it looked quite evident that what happened on September 11th was nothing like what we were told. That these 3 skyscrapers, not 2, but 3 skyscrapers were blown up that day in New York. The Pentagon was bombed and perhaps hit with a cruise missile, not a passenger jet. And the place where the 3rd plane supposedly crashed in Pennsylvania, or the 4th plane rather, was not really a plane crash site. And so it sounded ludicrous, but then I'd heard that Terry Mason had written a book about this, so I thought, well, I better look at it and just to see maybe there's something to it. David Ray Griffin's a very serious man. So I looked and I was shocked. It was very obvious that we had been lied to, that the media was actually part of the cover-up, which was surprising to me. I didn't realize the American media was that controlled. So I was kind of horrified and had to face the choice between continuing to work in the university and working on my career, which would require being very obedient to the powers that be for 7 years while I got tenure, or else trying to deal with this political problem. And I decided to go ahead and work on the 9/11 issue because it was too important to wait for 7 years. I could see that the world was being degraded by this, the results of this false flag operation. Revealing the truth about it could conceivably improve the world even more than the September 11th inside job degraded the world. So it was such an important issue. It was kind of an Archimedes lever that could move the world. And I started doing serious research as well as teach-ins and activism on this issue. I spent 2 years doing that, 2004 through 2006. And then in 2006, the politicians in Wisconsin demanded that I be fired from my job teaching at the university because of my work on 9/11. Well, specifically what they actually they said that it was something I had said on a radio show that they didn't like, which was very strange. So I then had a very well-publicized fight with the politicians, and I was all over the media. And at that point I became unemployable in the university. They couldn't fire me that semester, but they didn't rehire me for the following semesters. And so I had to find a new career as an independent scholar and journalist. And so I've been doing that ever since. And I think it's been worth doing because, again, this issue has changed the world so profoundly that revealing the truth about it, even little bit by bit, which is what we're doing, can have very profound consequences.
But despite the fact that a lot of people are realizing that there have been a lot of lies, but we continue to hear still more lies about new things which are happening in the world. These wars which are being created in a way with these characters which are called Muslims. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think this is something which is valid as a person who's become a Muslim?
Well, Hollywood has been casting Muslims as villains for quite some time, really ever since the creation of the State of Israel. And there's a book called Real Good Arabs about this, that they stereotype Arabs and Muslims as terrorists. They've been doing this since the 1960s. And in a sense, September 11th was another Hollywood film in which they cast 19 people as suicide hijackers. It turns out none of those 19 people were even on board any of these allegedly hijacked planes. And they were, for the most part, not devout Muslims. It appears that many of them had been impersonated by intelligence agents. The guy who was pretending to be Muhammad Atta in Florida was a fluent speaker of Hebrew, according to his stripper girlfriend, and his habits were certainly not the habits of a serious Muslim, much less an extremist. So it was really like a movie, and they cast these characters as hijackers and set them up to take the blame, and they set bin Laden up as the old man of the mountain. In fact, bin Laden, in a way, is kind of the bad guy character from the Walt Disney film Aladdin. Which itself, believe it or not, was based on the anti-Jewish stereotype character from the Disney film The Three Little Pigs, a tall, hook-nosed villain who was destroying the houses of Americans. This was the anti-Jewish stereotype in the 1930 film The Three Little Pigs by Walt Disney. Then Michael Eisner, a Zionist, bought up the Disney company, and the first movie he put out was Aladdin, with this vizier character who's based on the anti-Jewish stereotype. Now it's an anti-Muslim stereotype. And so the Hollywood people, the other public relations people, mind controllers, media people, have started telling this story, casting Muslims as villains. 9/11 was the catalyst for this. And in order to maintain this narrative, they have to keep staging smaller false flag events and scenarios. So the current issue with ISIS or ISIL or Islamic State, I hate saying that because they're not Islamic at all, and they're not a state either. These people are just the latest people who are being cast as Muslim villains in this global cinema that's being used to control the minds of the world's population. And we've really entered a world in which truth has been sidelined by the power of the mainstream media and the public relations industry to tell stories for their own purposes. If they can keep the illusion of a war on terror and a crisis with Islam going into the future, then people still believe it, and they don't look critically back at 9/11 or 7/7, Bali, Madrid, and these other false flag episodes. So it's been a hard time, really, to be an American who came to Islam, for spiritual reasons, not political reasons.
You became a Muslim in 1993, right?
Yes, I did.
So that was way before anything like that happened, and you.
Well, it was actually, interestingly, it was right after the first World Trade Center bombing, but I wasn't really paying attention to that. I was interested in spirituality. So
let's go back to the fact that you raised the questions about 9/11, and of course, the fact that the 9/11 became the excuse for these invasions inside the Middle East, and considering the Muslims who had apparently or said so attacked the 9/11 towers, who are the terrorists today? I mean, how are you being treated in the United States? I mean, do they consider you as a terrorist today?
Well, I finally made the list where they search me very, very carefully when I get on airplanes. And this didn't happen until just this summer. I don't know why. I have been interrogated at airports before, but I had never been on the list where there's a little red mark by your name. And they take you aside, and they take you away from all the other passengers, and then they go through all of your carry-on baggage, dusting it very carefully for explosives. So that's been going on since this summer. And I've also had a couple of interesting experiences being interrogated at airports before that. In 2007 or 8, I was held by the FBI at the Newark, New Jersey airport. I was returning from New York, where I had been doing speeches and so on September 11th anniversary. And the FBI took me and said, hello, Mr. Barrett, would you please come with us? Took me over to a private room, flashing their badges. There were 3 of them. And they started out by saying, do you know where have you ever seen this notebook? And they held up a notebook that I had lost. I had left it on the plane flying into New Jersey a few days before that. And I said, yes, I recognize that notebook. And they said, why is there Arabic writing in it? I said, well, I was a student of Arabic. My Ph.D. is in Arabic, and so this is a notebook from when I was learning Arabic. And I took it on the plane because I was going to write my speech. But then I got talking to the person next to me, and I forgot the notebook. And they said, well, would you please translate this Arabic for us? And so I had to read some of the Arabic writing that I had written when I was studying Arabic years ago. And then they kind of reached the high point of the interrogation, and the lead investigator looked at me and said, are you a terrorist? And I said, no, sir, I'm just trying to help you guys catch the real terrorists. and they said, well, tell us about that. So I sat down and spent 15 minutes going over the real story of 9/11 with them. And I didn't get the sense that they were particularly skeptical about what I was saying. In fact, they were kind of nodding along, taking notes, and looking like they were not the least bit surprised, and even kind of supportive of what I was saying. Mm-hmm. And when I left them, they shook hands with me and treated me with tremendous respect and wished me luck getting my job back. So the feeling emotions, but they actually know about the reality of 9/11 and are probably not all that happy about having to be part of the cover-up. And I've had similar experiences being held in airports, flying back once from Turkey and once from Iran.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so every time you went back to the U.S.?
Well, they give me a quick debriefing. So it's actually, it's been interesting, the variety of reactions. But in virtually all these cases, the people who have asked about the 9/11 subject, these officials, TSA people, FBI people, are all kind of supportive of 9/11 truth.
So you think there's something happening inside the U.S., an awakening? People are getting more aware of lies that are been told?
You know, I think deep down inside, possibly a majority of Americans really knows that they were lied to on 9/11. Maybe a lot more than half. According to some polls, 85% don't really believe the government version.
But why can't they say anything about it?
I think they're afraid to. You know, I think that denial is a very common psychological mechanism for dealing with really threatening information. And people know that this is, if they really learn that, yes, the conspiracy theorists are right, that's going to be so threatening. They're going to feel bad about their country. They're going to feel bad if they don't try to do something about it. But what are they going to want to do about it? You know, it's a very depressing subject for people, and so they'd rather just avoid it.
But how can a country like the United States, who declares itself being the flag bearer of democracy and human rights and freedom of speech, how can they today continue with these same attitudes that they have towards other countries where they deny them their rights of having any sort of technology, for example, in Iran, and even being leaders of their own country, a voted leader of a country like Syria? I mean, they consider that leader has to go away. How do you think this mechanism has been put in place? Who are the decision makers?
Well, you know, I think that there is, of course, a sort of an enemy creation mechanism in human nature to a certain extent, that we have a tendency to sometimes demonize others and scapegoats and blame our problems on some scapegoat. And so, you know, people and tribes have been quarreling with each other forever. So that's part of human nature. But I think the United States of America in particular has a kind of an extreme tendency to demonize other countries and other countries' leaders. You really see this with cases like when Gaddafi was killed. Hillary Clinton famously went on television and said, we came, we saw, he died, and cackled horribly, like a witch. What other country, you can't imagine Angela Merkel doing that. I mean, she's not very pleasant either, but my goodness, she wouldn't do that. And I think that's symptomatic. George W. Bush was also symptomatic in certain ways, the way he would play the cowboy and say, if you're not with us, you're against us, you're with the terrorists. And that sort of attitude. It's, again, this is why Leo Strauss loved America and cheap American movies, the white hat, the black hat. There's this really strong tendency to demonize the other.
Well, this kind of makes you feel that these characters they're talking about, leaders are like cartoon characters as well, but there's a lot of bloodshed because of these people around the world. Mm-hmm. How can that be justified, and where does it stop, and how should it be stopped?
It's a really good question. How can we get off this roller coaster? It's like a thrill ride in a way, where people turn on their television sets and they see the latest beheading video, which they notice that it came from the Middle East, but they don't notice that it came through Rita Katz's outfit, this Zionist propaganda outfit that has been manufacturing all kinds of false evidence against Muslims. They're the ones who come up with this beheading video that looks like it might have been filmed on a soundstage somewhere for all we know. But people see these images, the exploding twin towers with people eating dust clouds chasing people through the streets, thousands of people blown up. These images, these horrific, scary images, I think partly are used to thrill people. People think, well, thank goodness that's not me, and they go back to eating dinner, so they're pacified in a certain sense. They buy into the narrative. These are such evocative images that they get people involved, at least to a small extent, in the narrative. So people accept the narrative, right? That's really what they're for. And so how do we stop this process of having political leaders who manipulate the ignorant and aggressive and evil sides of human nature by using these kinds of theatrical processes? It's going to be a long-term struggle. I don't think that there's any way to do it immediately. I think the internet has helped. In the Western countries, there is a thriving alternative media on the internet. And Press TV, of course, like Russia Today and various other outlets, has taken advantage of this by noticing, wow, some of the best people in the West are not getting any airtime at CNN, and they're not getting any airtime at Fox unless they get brought on for Bill O'Reilly to beat them up. But these people are doing good independent media, so let's give them the high production values here at Press TV. Brilliant. And so the independent media is picking up steam. And more people are finding out the truth about these things. There's the saying, take the red pill, that comes from the film The Matrix, where you can either take the blue pill and be in this nice, friendly illusion, or you can take the red pill and see reality exactly the way it really is in all of its horror. And more people are taking the red pill. And I think at some point there could be a kind of a tipping point where the right number of people has finally got this, including some people in positions of power. And suddenly it will coalesce and turn in a different direction. Whether that happens around revealing the truth of September 11th or something else, I don't know. But we see already false flags failing. The Syria al-Ruta false flag last year failed. They tried to implicate Assad and get the bombing against Assad. It didn't work. Well, now they're playing this game with this ISIS, Islamic State group, and it's backfiring. It's actually not helping the Zionists and the Tekfiris at all. It's so I think that they're kind of caught in their own web of deception, and eventually that web will fall apart.
And you talked about the Tekfiris. Who are these people? Are they real? I mean, do you consider them Muslims?
Yeah, the Tekfiris range from, they're an extreme spin-off of sort of the Wahhabis and then the Salafis. And I think, yes, there are Salafis that I certainly would consider Muslim. I wouldn't agree with them about certain things, but like I have a friend, well, I haven't been in touch with this guy for a few years, but a friend who's basically Salafi, although I think he's mellowed a bit. And at a certain level, Salafis can almost be like just sort of, liberal, watered down, mushy Muslims who haven't chosen a madhab, right? I mean, and then at the other extreme, there are these lunatic, head choppers.
Do you think they really are real believers, or they just love to chop heads?
Well, the head choppers, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, people are capable of all kinds of grotesque behaviors under some circumstances. But when you see, I think a lot of them are stupid. I think that there are people being recruited from the West who actually buy into this. And I think the Western media narrative is designed partly to try to convince stupid, young, impressionable Muslims who are really angry that, oh, here's the most radical group that's out there that's really fighting, and now that doesn't work with 99% of the Muslims, and certainly it's not working with any leaders, scholars, anybody respected, nations. Nobody with any respect or any level of claim to have any kind of Islamic expertise or standing is buying into this. But there is always, the young people always want to rebel against their elders, and there's a reason that a lot of Muslims are angry these days. I think Muslims, in a way, should be a lot angrier than we are. And so all of that anger, so much of it suppressed and distorted, leads to a situation where they can actually recruit, handfuls of these young and naive people who probably are sincere, and then some of those people, being human, end up doing terrible things.
Maybe a reason why maybe people react less violently is because they want to show peacefully that they can also react peacefully to such horrors and not do the same thing as those who they're against.
Well, that's true, but again, when I say that Muslims should be angrier than they are, I think that a lot of American Muslims in particular have suppressed their anger and even turned it inward against themselves, and some of them have bought into this good Muslim versus bad Muslim dichotomy. And they haven't recognized that the struggle for justice, especially in Palestine, the struggle against imperialism and injustice, is part of Islam. And I respect that Iran, more than any other country, I think, has held on to that notion of struggling for justice as part of Islam. And I think Muslims around the world, especially in America, should be angered by injustice enough to try to do something about it.
So for you as an independent thinker, what's your biggest challenge?
Well, I guess making a living is one of the biggest. Being an independent thinker in the USA today puts you outside of all of the institutions that might otherwise put you on their payrolls. So I can't work at any American university anymore. And it's not that hard for me to tell the truth. It's actually easier to tell the truth. You don't have to remember all the lies. The people who tell lies have to remember so many things. They have to really be brilliant experts. But if you're just kind of an ordinary person, and I think I'm fairly ordinary in a lot of ways, you can do very well in debates with liars just by sticking with the truth. So that part's pretty easy. Cutting through the nonsense of the mainstream discourse comes very naturally to me. But trying to find a platform to get that message out in the biggest possible way, and also to make a living while doing it, is a real challenge.
And what would you suggest to people who are still considering being, let's say, independent thinkers and truth seekers?
Pace yourself. Don't burn out. I see so many people who discover the truth about 9/11 who are outraged, who go out in the streets handing out DVDs and books and just getting bullhorns and barking out 9/11 was an inside job on bullhorns all day long till their voice goes out. And they do this for a couple of months, and then they can't take it anymore, and they have some kind of crisis, and the next thing you know, they're back at some job and they're not doing anything. So I think it's important to, whatever you're doing to make the world better, to do it at the level that you can sustain it over time. You don't want to just burn yourself out overnight. You want to find just that level where it's actually fun. And for me, I can do a lot of this stuff and it's still fun. Other people, maybe they can, go out on one weekend a month and do some activism, post a few things on Facebook. But whatever you're doing, just, try to stay positive, because, when you're dealing with all these negative phenomena, there's always that tendency to get burdened by them. And I think you need to find some humor, enjoyment, camaraderie, and you're going to find the best possible camaraderie, the best possible people if you get involved in this. So I would say, enjoy yourself, pace yourself, and plan on keeping it up for a long time, because we're going to win this, but it's going to take a few years.
Well, thanks a lot, Kevin Barrett, for all these ideas that you gave us, for your suggestions about how to deal with these events that are happening around us. And hopefully we have another discussion soon on Face to Face.